As the legislative session begins in Florida, so do the campaigns to replace the chief executive of the state. Today, we're hearing from Lieutenant Governor Jay Collins and discussing his military background, his efforts as a state senator, and what he's been trying to prove in the short time since he was appointed by Governor Ron DeSantis. And it's just about 1 year since President Donald Trump began his second term. Has Trump 2.0 been radically different from 8 years ago? Rick Mullaney will examine the successes and failures of both policy and politics on This Week in Jacksonville. And so glad you're here with us today. Rick Mullaney here with us too. And so we're looking at this first full year in office for President Trump, the second time around. Rick, you probably know, the founder and director of the Haskell Public Policy Institute at Jacksonville University. So Rick, broad strokes here. What do you think of this first year in term two, Trump 2.0? It's a lot different, isn't it?
Well, Kent, the 1 year anniversary is Tuesday, and Trump 2.0 is very, very different from Trump 1.0. Lots and lots of differences. Make no mistake, this time Donald Trump came in very emboldened. In his view, he had a mandate. Now, whether that's true or not, he did sweep those swing states. He did win the popular vote. He believed he had a mandate. He had his team, and he knew what he wanted to accomplish. And from day one, you saw it with the executive orders. In his first 100 days, 140 executive orders, the most in history, wide-ranging on lots and lots of topics. Over 200 in this first year, which, by the way, Kent, is more than his entire first term. Also in that first term, a little bit more constrained by the naysayers. In this term, less constrained. Certainly, there are a lot of things that define this past year. One of the things, certainly, is the expansion and the pushing the limits of presidential power and executive power. This past year has been remarkable. It has been consequential. And for President Trump, he has his detractors and he has his supporters, but few would disagree. It has been one of the most remarkable first years of any presidency in U.S. history.
Yeah, so let's focus there for a moment. Executive power and the power of the executive branch. Is it overreach, as some of his opponents complain? And we know Supreme Court and Congress, they've got a role in what the executive office can and can't do.
They clearly do. And Congress so far, of course, has not been very constraining. But it's been pushing the limits both domestic and in foreign policy. Domestically, take a look at tariffs, for example, which traditionally Article 1 power, the taxing power with Congress, they provide legislation. That, of course, is before the U.S. Supreme Court. I actually think that Donald Trump may lose that. Tariffs, he's pushed that limit. You've seen the deployment of the National Guard to various cities. The Supreme Court has put some limitations on that. Look at the way he's approached, for example, the federal agencies and how they're funded and the firings going on there, pushing the limits of congressional power. In step after step, particularly in those executive orders, which were so sweeping, some relating to higher education, some relating to how law firms function, where there's been some pushbacks of the court, there's just been no doubt that during this first year, one of the defining characteristics has been pushing the limits of presidential power. Now, by the way, he's not the first to do it. And in the last few decades, we've certainly seen that. And Joe Biden, President Biden did it also. And 3 times the U.S. Supreme Court reversed what Joe Biden had done. But I don't believe it's the same breadth, the depth, or the extent that we've seen with President Trump.
Rick, you brought up tariffs. Let's talk about that. What's their impact so far and what could still be ahead?
You know, Kent, this is an interesting one. I think some people like to point to some successes. We can talk about that, such as securing the border. Some will talk about some areas where he's really vulnerable, affordability. We can talk about that. But when it comes to tariffs, it's very mixed. This is one where Donald Trump, unlike Donald Trump, is a little bit ideological in the sense that he's believed in tariffs for decades. And he has kind of flipped what's happened here, because it used to be that the protectionist party, the Democrats were the ones who were pro-tariffs, and it was the Republicans who wanted free trade. Now that has sort of switched. He says he loves the word tariffs, and what we saw in this past year, back in April, Liberation Day, when tariffs were imposed on 185 countries around the world, and since then, with tariffs with Canada and Mexico and China, this is one in which there's a big disagreement from a policy standpoint, from a legal standpoint, and politically. And one of the concerns is, are they inflationary? Remember, the president doesn't really have that many ways to affect prices, but certainly one of the arguments here is that tariffs have. By the way, another piece of that is interest rates. And the Fed on interest rates, and that battle we have certainly seen with Jerome Powell in particular and the attacks on the independence of the Fed. But lowering those interest rates, some argue, is more vulnerable on inflation. Some of the president's policies when it comes to those price issues, whether it's cutting taxes, whether it's interest rates, whether it's spending, whether it's tariffs, arguably are not in tune to that notion of how do we bring down prices. That's a vulnerability for the midterms.
Yeah. So the idea of foreign policy. I think this has been much different as well. You and I talking about getting ready for our segment today. I mean, what was expected was maybe isolationist or nationalist. Instead, we see this foreign policy that the president says we're getting involved everywhere.
It has been remarkable. And if someone had told you a year ago that it would look like this today, I don't think many people would have thought that. He clearly has some successes he can point to. High up on the list to me is the release of the hostages by Hamas, for example, and the work he's trying to do in the Middle East. And we have witnessed, and it certainly took some bold decisions by the president, some remarkable military operations, stunning. The bombing of those nuclear facilities in Iran, the capture of Maduro out of Venezuela without any American casualties truly has been stunning. But when you step back, what you're talking about is the approach to foreign policy, much more interventionist, particularly focused on this hemisphere. Not a success, of course, has been Ukraine. That is a separate issue. And I would argue that Russia is in much better position today than it was a year ago. Russia is much more emboldened today than it was a year ago, and that has been proved to be very challenging. But foreign policy is one of those areas in which it has been much more activist than anybody really expected.
Yeah, what do you think happens with this situation with Greenland? That was this week. We're hearing about this, where the president says their only defense is a couple of goats. I mean, he's saying things that you don't know. Are we really going to be expansionists again?
I don't think so when it comes to Greenland. You certainly saw his deputy chief of staff, Stephen Miller, talking about not taking military action off the table, and his spokesperson not taking it off the table. Let me,
You're going to take it off the
I'm
table?
officially going to take it off the table. Okay, that's not going to happen. That shouldn't happen. Greenland is a member of NATO. They're an ally. They have 56,000 people and a lot of snow. The president is correct that they are strategically important. We may, and there's been interest in the past about potentially purchasing Greenland, but whether that happens or not, we'll have to wait and see. But I think that's one of those cases in which the president it's a strategic objective, but the rhetoric hasn't really matched what we're trying to do. I will say this, Ken, the president in his first year has been very strategic about those things in which he thinks there's high probability of success. That was true in Iran with that very surgical operation. That was true in Venezuela. And that's been true in a number of different initiatives that he has. He likes executive orders because he can do that. He likes some of these foreign policy initiatives because he can do it in areas where he doesn't feel constrained. This year ahead in 2026, I think you're going to see the president probably losing some legal battles on birthright citizenship, for example, on tariffs, for example, and some other areas that will provide some constraint. And you're starting to see Congress push back in some areas. But this has been, in this first year, in which President Trump has exercised muscle, both domestically and in foreign policy.
And I guess, as you and I talked about it, the ultimate report card for this first year is going to be when the voters may push back and we see what happens in the midterms. Thank you, Rick. Now, Rick and I interviewed Lieutenant Governor Jay Collins recently. We're going to dive into the candidate for governor's background and his priorities right now. That's next on This Week in Jacksonville.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville with Kent Justice.
And this morning, we've got an opportunity to learn more about Jay Collins, the lieutenant governor in Florida for less than a year. Political analyst Rick Mullaney joined me in our recent conversation, and that took place just days before Collins announced his run for governor.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. It's exciting to be here today. So if you're going to look at my story, I think you got to start where we came from, right? I'm my father's son. I was born to a 16-year-old kid adopted by my grandparents. The son of a failed farmer. We lost our farm coming out of the 80s. The economy was rough. I joined the Army after a couple years in college, realized I wasn't going to go to the NFL, and maybe I should have a new career choice, and fell in love with the military. I did. I spent 23 years in total. You know, I had a few opportunities to overcome. I did get shot and blown up. Both are highly overrated. I don't recommend it. But then I had the opportunity to save my arm when I was injured, did surgery on myself in Afghanistan, saved my left arm. I did lose my leg 7 years after getting hit by a mortar. But you know what? I also had the opportunity to requalify as a Green Beret. And I say the opportunity because that moment that can break you is also that moment that will make you, if you let it. It takes pressure and heat to really form steel, and we get stronger if you get through these things, and that's what I chose to do. I met my wife in the military, who's also a 20-year combat veteran. Her name is Layla. We have two boys, Gabe and Colt. who are really the reason we do this. I got into politics a little surprisingly. It wasn't what I dreamed of. I thought I'd be in a boat in the Gulf fishing after my 23-year military career. But you know what? I love our nation. And I deployed all over the nation, all over the world, trying to protect and preserve what we love. And, you know, that mission, that ethos, that approach, it continues on. You don't just hang it up. You know, I swore an oath to protect and serve, and that continues on to this day.
Well, Lieutenant, first of all, thank you for your service. I mean that sincerely. And after leaving the military, of course, you were a state senator in 2022. Yes. Pretty energetic one, too, from what I can tell. You chaired the Agriculture and Transportation Committee, passed dozens of bills, secured over $100 million in funding, particularly for the Tampa Bay area. But my question is, in that transition from the legislature to your current role as Lieutenant Governor, how do you now influence public policy, and what are your top policy priorities as Lieutenant Governor?
Wow, wonderful question. So when I ran on three simple things: economy, education, and safety and security in the community. And I say those three things because those are things that unite us all, right? You know, we are the American people. I don't care if you're black, white, polka dot, race, creed, color, gender, it doesn't matter. We have 23.5 million citizens right here in the great state of Florida, and I represent every single one of them, even if they wouldn't vote for me. I don't care about that. Do the next hard right. And when I look at policy, what is it that's going to leave things better for our next generation? You see, fundamentally, I believe we have a responsibility to protect and preserve what we have and what we love for the next generation. So God willing, our kids can do the same thing for theirs. We have to pass that on. We have to fight and protect that. So how do we put more money back in people's pockets? How do we make sure that education provides opportunity to raise everybody up? And how do we make sure that safety and security are across our state? Because when communities are strong and safe, people are happy and healthy. Happy, healthy people build great businesses, build a great community and a great economy, and this thing just keeps pouring on.
Are you trying to reshape somewhat the role of the Lieutenant Governor? Because what you just described is a little bit at odds with what we've seen from past Lieutenant Governors. Are you trying to make it a more energetic and positive office, or more actively involved on the policy side?
I am. So I think life gives you opportunities, right? You can sit and roll over and let things be how it was always going to be or how it's always been, or you can make it your own. I refuse to be put in a box. I want to stand up and fight and do everything I can. And if a door shuts, you got to find a new one. God doesn't give us all of the answers. He does provide us opportunities to overcome and solve problems and to serve 23.5 million people. As someone who grew up on welfare, as someone who grew up on commodity cheese, man, it's an incredible opportunity. It's an amazing story. But if I can do it, man, everybody can do it.
Lieutenant Governor, I know that as we talk now, the legislative session's just getting underway. Governor DeSantis has called for a special session in April to talk about congressional redistricting. From your perspective, what are maybe key principles that should guide lawmakers as they go through that process?
Yeah, so again, you know, I think this is something we should look into. I know there's some Supreme Court rulings that we're expecting out on this, and if our maps don't represent the reality of the on-the-ground voter breakdown of demographics, well, then we should step in. We should look into that. And you know, from what we're hearing, that's going to be the case. So whether we win seats, we lose seats, I don't care. It's about making sure there's an accurate representation for our people here in the great state of Florida. You know, I'm on record saying, look, I think it's something we should look into. We'll wait and see how this Supreme Court ruling comes out, and I stand with our governor.
It seems like in other states that we've been watching, it looks like partisan when you look at California or other states where they're saying, hey, we want more seats for our side of the aisle. That's something you're saying shouldn't be a guiding principle of what happens here?
Well, what I'm saying is you have to make sure it's an accurate representation. We follow our laws. You know, the one thing that if you listen to Governor DeSantis is he is very clear that we're going to do this the right way. We're going to make sure that it is accurate representation. And if math wasn't being used properly in polling and census data, well, that should be an accurate reflection of what's on the ground. It's garbage in, garbage out. If they gave us bad data, well, then we better do the right thing with that data. And I think the facts and the truth will come out and represent themselves on the ground.
Well, you mentioned that you're expecting a Supreme Court opinion on this, and back in 2022, pretty significant Florida Supreme Court opinion. So we've had a lot of litigation in Florida and around the country this year on this very topic. Sometimes it's about minority representation or an argument of partisan gerrymandering. And so the question is, I think you're outlining it somewhat, the guiding principles for the legislature in September, because Florida, at least at the congressional level, already has a 20-8 advantage, Republicans versus Democrat. And as Kent just mentioned, some view this, whether this was in California or Texas, maybe Florida, some view this and say, is this an attempt to tilt the playing field? What's the real objective here?
Well, I think the real objective is exactly what we said. It's to make sure that it's an accurate representation. We have a 1.4 million voter surplus compared to Democrats, right, in the state. Yep. Do our lines reflect that? I don't know. I think we have something we have to look into. But where I have concern is if the polling data that we received, right, the data from the administration, the Biden administration was flawed or wasn't detailed correctly, well, we have a problem. And I don't know how it's going to be. I don't have the metrics in front of me. But in the end, if the math doesn't represent our people, well, then we should really look into that. We have a responsibility to look into that.
We have more of Jay Collins' priorities when it comes to agriculture in Florida. That's next on This Week in Jacksonville.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville on Channel 4.
2026 is an election year, and Lieutenant Governor Jay Collins wants a promotion. As a state senator, Collins fought for infrastructure and agriculture. Here is more of my conversation with Collins and Rick Mullaney.
Well, let's be very clear. Food security is national security. If we can't feed ourselves, we lose everything. When other nations, other countries that control our food supply, they control us, whether we want to admit it or not. That's a problem. Here in Florida, agriculture has always been a primary part of who we are and what we do. The citrus industry is struggling right now. We know there's been a lot of things that affected it. God willing, they'll be on the rebound soon. We have over 300 commodity lines, and disproportionately, bad legislative approaches at the federal level have really harmed our farmers because they didn't have the brokerage ability of some of the wheat belt, right? The commodity lines were just different. We've got to fight for those things. And when you talk about lab-grown meat, to me, the Department of Agriculture is also consumer services. When you get into the rabbit hole, if you go down and study and research and see what lab-grown meat truly is, I don't want people experimenting, and I don't want that done on our kids. If you prove to me without equivocation that it's safe and reliable and it's gonna work, fine. But we're not gonna do that at the taxpayer expense while we test things. Just without a doubt, it wasn't the right thing for our people here in Florida. And the same thing I'm gonna say now is what I said then. I don't think it's no forever, but you gotta do the proof. If the science isn't there that says it's unequivocally safe for our people long-term, well then don't try to force it on us to prove your product. That being said, picking winners and losers, I think the free market works. And getting the government out of the way of the free market often leads to better results. I want businesses to step up, fight, and thrive in our community. And frankly, we need to draw people here to build, just like we have been, and let them know that in Florida, you're gonna have a fighting chance. The government's gonna get out of your way. That's why we have no income tax, why we're discussing property tax, and live that American dream right here, one day at a time.
Well, let me shift a little bit free market, but a different topic, artificial intelligence, which is beginning to affect simply everything from healthcare to the military to education, elections. And so part of the question is, for this session, it's bubbling up even more and will be more in the future. A couple questions. One, what do you think the role of local government, particularly in Florida, should be with regard to the regulation of artificial intelligence? And a related question, what specific policies in particular would you recommend? And forgive me for a third question in there, and how do you make this fit with the national concern that there not be 50 different approaches around the country to regulating artificial intelligence?
Well, let's go backwards, right? Federally, I don't think that I would prefer to have this at the state level. I think the state should have a say in how this works. Our founding fathers didn't want a federal government so strong to give you everything that they can take away everything. AI has incredible opportunities, but it also has dramatic things that should make you pause and look into it. And let's kind of unpack those a little bit. One, the energy concepts wrapped around artificial intelligence, they're very real. You know, we have available and affordable energy on demand right now, but that doesn't mean we always will. I am not a firm believer in if you build it, it will come. We can't build more data centers and draw more things out if we don't have ready energy on reserve. Otherwise, it's going to get passed directly back to the consumer, and I'm not okay with that. We already struggle with affordability, right? People have talked about that as long as we can. Let's not compound this problem by allowing that to happen with data centers. But I'm also not someone who doesn't see the value. Our military community says we're 6 to 8 years behind our near peers in terms of AI interpretation and derivative theory and data modulation, right? We can do better. We got to catch up. But we also have to build and develop those energy sources. The cooling factors, there's different ways to do that, right? We have to figure that out as well. But the thing that we have to talk about is that frontline barrier. AI is only as good as the people who are creating the mindset and the database and whatever it is that's disseminating how that information is broken down and understood. If that is flawed and leans too far left, too far right, and isn't right in the middle and just the facts, you're going to sway public opinion disproportionately. Most kids, they aren't even Googling things now. They're just talking to OpenAI or whoever, right? And they're saying, hey, tell me about this. And that's the facts and the truth, and it's not something people are actually vetting. That's frightening right there. You want to switch how a country thinks. That's the way to do it. So let's talk about regulation. I think when it comes to power and energy, we have to have a bigger discussion. I'm a huge proponent of micro and small modular and micro reactors. I think nuclear is probably the best way to manage this moving into the future. We have to continue to have that discussion. And I welcome our county commission, our city council, our mayors to come in and let's have a discussion and figure out where the right path is. What I would love to see is our subject matter experts, people who are experts in the security side, experts in the programmatic side, and experts in where this can go from a market standpoint, come together with our government on all levels, and let's have a real conversation and dig through this, talk through this and understand where the high points are, where the rubs are, and see what we can solve together to make this work for everybody. But I fully support the governor's approach here as well, because I see the energy draw, because I hear of people whose kids are committing suicide because AI is turned into a friend and talk them into a place where they can't get out of. It's frightening as a dad. And I want to make sure that we're not creating something like a Pandora's box that we can never go back on.
And ahead on our agenda here on the show, Florida Secretary of Elder Affairs Michelle Branham will join us. We also have Jax Chambers Daniel Davis and School Superintendent Dr. Christopher Bernier lined up. I'm Kent Justice. Thanks for watching on air on Channel 4 in the CW17 and finding us online and streaming on News4JAX Plus.
See why every day more people are choosing News4JAX, Northeast Florida and South Georgia's #1 source for local news.